I want to just share some ideas. The theme of today's talk is that which only you can do. There are things in this life that only you can do for yourself. Nobody else can do it for you. And the real questions that we must come down to consider in our own lives is, are we really doing the things that only we can do, or are we wasting time either by allowing ourselves to be distracted or by waiting for somebody else to do that for us which only we can do for ourselves? Kind of time management, if you will, in terms of our personal life, in terms of our spiritual life. That's what we want to talk about today. What's the most important thing in our lives? How much time are we giving it? Or are we waiting for somebody else to do it for us? So keep that in the back of your mind as we go through this. And I'm going to kind of lead you to how I got there, or how it got to me. I guess that's a better way of putting it, how the talk got to me this week. So I've been working up at the studio. You know that I volunteer up at the TV studio. And working with a producer who's been doing a series on the cost of living in Charlotte, affordable housing. There's a big thing in the news here that affordable housing is a crisis in Charlotte, and it's not just a buzzword in Charlotte. It's everywhere. Politicians everywhere are picking up on it. We interviewed somebody from Hong Kong, and they've got a situation there. But there's this term that's going on, and she's been looking into, well, what does it really mean? What do people really mean? Because everybody seems to mean something different by the term, and what might the root causes be? And is it the problem the price of housing, or is the problem the wages that are being paid? Are businesses paying a livable wage? And are people working for a livable wage? All that kind of thing. And in the course of the discussion, it naturally came up, of, well, what is the responsibility of a wage earner? Why does someone work for a wage that they can't afford to make a living on? And of course, there's many reasons why that would be so. And when it gets down to it, sometimes people are stuck. They just feel stuck. So then the question becomes, in terms of, investigative journalism and kind of peeling back the onion, is, should the solutions be to build more houses, or to find ways to help people move or get unstuck? So that's kind of what's been going on in the backdrop of my life for the last couple of weeks, And this issue then comes up of, well, what would happen if we, as as the person responsible for our own lives, what would happen if we looked after our life with the same sense of responsibility, the same sense of diligence that a business has to look after its affairs, And the question is, do we consider ourselves to be the CEO of our own lives? Do we consider ourselves to be ultimately responsible, the one who ultimately has to make the decisions and then carry out the actions that go with those decisions in order to do the things that we need to do for our lives to be thriving and successful, if we can use those terms that a business might use. And one of the key differences that I find is in the business world, there is this sense of financial responsibility. The primary purpose of a business is to generate earnings for the owners. That's the responsibility. It's a legal responsibility that businesses have. And in order to carry out that responsibility, they hire managers, CEOs, CFOs, board members, employees. They hire people who are driven to achieve that result, the drive for results. At one point in my career, I was involved in defining the qualities of leaders in an organization. And I didn't do it. I just kind of provided some input into it. But the Human Resources Department went out and hired a third-party consultant. Then they went out and they examined leaders across many different businesses and in the world, and came up with this list of qualifications. These were the characteristics of competent leaders. And then the idea was that they would figure out a way to assess candidates when they're going to hire somebody in. How does the candidate match up against these 12 key characteristics? But the number one on the list, and I didn't agree with it, by the way, but the number one on the list was the drive for results. The successful business leader, and I'm talking about executive level, that they were looking for, these people who were running divisions within the company, was that they had to have this competitive desire, this drive for results, that no matter what happened in the marketing environment, so you go in and you lay out your plans for the year and you say, we're going to do this, we're going to ship this much of this product and that much of that product, and we're going to open branch offices here and there, and that's going to generate a certain amount of business, and all the things that you do in strategic planning. And of course, once you lay your plans and once you get started, everything changes on you. Everything changes. Not always, but sometimes everything changes. The marketing environment changes. The government passes a new law that has an adverse effect on you. Your competitors come out with a new product, which drastically changes the price that you can charge for yours, and on and on and on. But the thing that they were looking for was that the person that they had in charge felt responsible to achieve results no matter what happened in the marketing environment. So they would have to figure out a way to deal with all of these challenges that were presented to them, and they would somehow readjust their plans on the fly if necessary. They would shuffle around product lines. They would move resources around and not open this branch office, but open a different branch office, or all kinds of things that business managers had to do. And that's what they were looking for. They were looking for somebody, the number one characteristics that they came up with was that they had to have this drive for results. If they didn't have that drive for results, they were not going to be successful. So the whole system then is designed for accountability. It is designed for responsibility. It is designed to make sure that there is somebody there who is paying attention all the time and doing whatever needs to be done in order to do that which was decided at the beginning of the year to be most important to the company. Now, I would have to say that in our personal lives, we don't tend to think of ourselves in that light. We don't tend to think of ourselves as the CEO of our life, as somebody who needs to be constantly aware of what's going on, who needs to be paying attention, who needs to avoid distractions and focus on some particular desired result. We may do that if we're a real goal-oriented person. We tend to see people who will enter marathons or triathlons or different things that are really objective setting. They'll set a goal for themselves and then they'll work very, very hard to achieve it. But in terms of our life as a whole, in terms of what is this thing called life, and who am I and why am I here, and what is the most important thing for me to do in this time that I have here on this earth, I tend to think that most of us, we just don't think of ourselves that way. And I'll give you kind of one example. If you were running a business and you needed a car in your business, maybe you needed several cars to provide your salespeople with transportation, right? And the decision was made that you were going to buy cars instead of just paying people to use their own cars. Well, what would a business do? Well, a business would go out and they would kind of just decide, well, what are the characteristics of the car that we need? Do we need a car? Do we need an SUV because we're going to be carrying around sample cases? All those kind of things. Once they understood the requirements, then they might solicit bids from three different dealers, 3 different types of cars, 3 different brands. And the dealers would come back and they would say, well, this is a car that meets those requirements and this is the price of the car. But a business wouldn't stop there. A business would say, well, that's the selling price of the car. But what's the life cycle price of the car? over the course of time that we're going to own these cars and maintain these cars and drive these cars, and then when we're finished, sell these cars, what is the total cost? So they're going to look at the sales price. They're going to look at the cost of financing it. You know, is one dealer offering financing at a lower interest rate than another? They're going to look at the operating expenses in terms of fuel economy. Is one a diesel and one gasoline, and maybe the diesel will save a lot of money over the life cycle in fuel cost. You're going to look at maintenance costs. You're going to look at downtime, and ultimately they're going to look at how much are we going to get out of it. What's the trade-in value, or what's the resale value of this thing going to be when we're finished with it? And they're going to lay all that out, and they're going to crunch those numbers, and then they're going to say, well, this one right here is the most efficient. And it's going to take the least amount of company's resources in order to put a salesperson in that car. And that's the way they make that decision. You and I, on the other hand, we go out and buy a car, you know, and the first thing the salespeople are telling us or asking of us is, well, how much a month can you afford? And what they're going to try to do is sell you the car that they want to sell you, and figure out a way to get it down to the payment that you can afford. And that's what they're going to do. And we don't think about life cycle costs. You know, you finance the car for 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years. You know, it costs you a lot of different money, you know, that you're going to pay in interest. And we tend to go and look at cars, and we don't think, well, what is it that I need? You know, what are my needs? We get into this kind of romantic area of our lives with, you know, well, gee, you know, this is the car that I wanted when I was young, and this is going to be sporty. And look at all of the commercials for the four-wheel drive vehicles that have these people driving a four-wheel drive vehicle out in the wilderness somewhere. You know, they're driving down this dirt trail up to a lake, and there's a tent there, you know. And if you stop and think about how many people who have four-wheel drive vehicles ever do that, you know, it's got to be a minute percentage. Yet people go to that showroom and they look at that vehicle and they see themselves out there on that lake. Many of the car commercials are geared towards children, the children in the family. And the reason for that is when mom and dad go to the dealership and bring their kids to the dealership to buy a car, the kids will have seen something in the commercial that they like, and they'll say, oh, mommy, oh, daddy, buy us this car. We want this car. This is the car that we want, you know, for whatever reason. Maybe it has a DVD player in the back, and they can watch shows as mom and dad drive them around. And what is happening there is, in our personal lives, instead of making a cold, fact-oriented decision, we're making an emotional decision. We really want to make our kids happy, don't we? Don't all parents kind of want that? You know, we want our kids to be happy. And if they're jumping up and down and saying, please, please, please buy this one or buy that one, mommy and daddy will acquiesce to the children. So it's a totally different way that we make decisions, because there are different things important to us in our personal lives. You know, it's not just about money. But we tend to lose sight of the fact that we may be paying much more than we need to pay. And we don't think about what in business we call the opportunity cost of the money, which is, well, if I didn't spend all of this extra money on this car, what other things could I be doing with the money that I didn't spend on it? You know, maybe I could take the kids on a nice vacation somewhere and all that. We kind of lose sight of that. So my point there is just that in terms of being responsible for a business, we exercise a totally different kind of judgment, totally different way of looking at things. And yet, each and every one of us is in fact the only one responsible for our lives. We are the only one. Nobody else. We can't blame it on anybody else. We're going to talk a little bit more about that and religion in just a second here. So another thing that we did in business that we might want to look at, well, how would this carry over to our personal lives, is time management and efficiency, right? So from the very first day that a business opens its doors, it has to get more effective. It has to get more efficient. More effective means whatever your product or service is, you got to sell more of it. You know, you've got to bring in more revenue. You've got to increase your customer base. You got to all those kind of things. And effective means that you're doing things quickly as possible, and we are doing things for the lowest cost possible. Right? You don't want to be spending twice as much as if, let's say you were in a bakery, you don't want to be spending twice as much to bake your cakes as the bakery down the street if you can only sell them for the same price. You know, that's the way that a business would look at these things. So one of the things that they would do periodically in order to help everyone in the business to focus on effectiveness and efficiency is to bring in time management training, you know, Covey's 7 Habits and different things like that, all of which was good, all of which is beneficial. But if you think about what they do, if you think about what goes on in there, pretty much the idea is, well, we all only have 24 hours in a day. That's all we have, 24 hours in a day. From the richest person in the world to the poorest person in the world, we all only have 24 hours in a day. And the question then becomes, in the time that you're engaged in your business life, are you spending that time effectively and efficiently on the right things? So they would have you go through and you would make a prioritize list, you know. You get in the office in the morning and you look at all of the things that need to be done that day, and which of those things is the most important. And we used to label them A's, B's, and C's. You know, A absolutely had to be done, B was really ought to be done, and C was not too important. If it doesn't get done today, it's no big deal. We can do it another day, or maybe it wasn't that important at all. So once you get your list prioritized, your A's, your B's, and your C's, and you focus on the A's because those are the things that had to be done right away or had to be done that day, and you'd focus on them. And you start to look at them and you'd say, now, which of these can I delegate to somebody else? You know, maybe you would hire somebody else to do it, or maybe if you were a manager, you would give one of your subordinates the task to do it. And which of these am I the only one that can do these today? If I'm the only one who can do them, then I have to do them. They are a must-do for me. I delegate the others, and I must do these. So if you think about tasks in general, just in life, there's some things that you can do as well as other people can do. And when something like that needs to be done, well, either you can do it or you can let somebody else do it. Right? There are some things that you can't do, but somebody else can, you know. For example, if your car needed a brake job, most people would go out to a shop and pay somebody to do that because they can't or at least don't want to, but many people can't do a brake job on a car. But then there are things that only you can do. You are the only one who can do them for whatever reason. So in business, maybe you have the security clearance to do them, maybe you have the authority to do them, maybe you have a specialized set of skills or knowledge to do them that nobody else has, but you are the only one who can do them. And what we had to learn to do was to find those things and make sure that we do those, and make sure that we delegate what we can, make sure that we do the things that only we can do. And then when we were done doing the things that only we could do, then we can look at the rest of that list and say, now, do I want to do something else that's on this list? Is there something else here that you know, I want to get involved in? It might be something down from the C list items. It might be a fun thing to do, or it might be something that would kind of give you a chance to recycle your energy. And what we find is that people who are successful do that, focus on their priorities, find the things that only they can do. They do them while delegating the things that must be done but other people can do. And unsuccessful businesses and unsuccessful business people don't. what they tend to do is go in there and do everything but the things that only they can do. They get involved in everything else except the things that only they can do. They get involved in the fun things. They get involved in things that other people could be doing. They delegate items to other people, and then they go and they get involved while the other people are working on it. And what tends to happen is you'll see those people in the office very late at night or over the weekends and things like that, trying to catch up on the things that only they could do, And if they can't keep up with it, they fail. So what would happen if we brought that over to our personal life? What would happen if we came over and said, I am ultimately the only one responsible for my life. Nobody else. Just me. I am the only one responsible. What needs to be done in my life? What are the things that need to be done in my life? What are the most important things that need to be done in my life? Which of those things can I get somebody else to help me with or to do for me? And which of those things do I have to do entirely for myself? Now, we were joking this morning on the conference bridge just before the video started, about could somebody else go out and exercise for me and I would feel, I would feel better. I would feel stronger. My heart rate would go down. My muscle tone would improve. And we chuckle, because we can't do that. We can't do that. See? I'm the only one who can do that. Now, there's no shortage of contraptions that they'll sell you on TV and the internet. They'll tell you, you just put this little device on and it will exercise your muscles for you while you sit around and watch TV, or we'll sell you this little pill and you can eat anything you want and just take this little pill and it'll amazing. It will kind of burn the fat right off your body and convert it into muscle and all this stuff. And they sell a lot of them, I guess. They make enough at least to pay for the commercials. But with any sense at all, we come to realize that there's some things that no one can do for us. There's some things that we absolutely have to do for ourselves. And then we have to look at our life and say, well, where am I spending my time? Am I spending my time in distractions? Am I spending my time getting involved in everything else? Am I asking other people to help me do something and then I get involved and help them help me instead of focusing on that which only I can do? Now we bring this then over into our spiritual life, into religion and spirituality. And remember, I used a definition, I didn't make it up, but I used the definition of religion, that religion is believing in somebody else's experience of God. But spirituality is having our own experience of God. And if you think of the world religions, all of the world religions start with somebody having had an experience of God. Moses experienced God on the mountain, the burning bush, the I am that I am. Paul was knocked off his horse on the road to Damascus and experienced the risen Christ. And he largely is responsible for Christianity as we have it today. Joseph Smith experienced the angel Moroni, and the Mormon church was born. Muhammad experienced the angel Gabriel, and Islam was born. So every religion, if we look at every religion and trace it back to its origins, it started with somebody else's experience. And then we are kind of given dogma and creed, and we are told if we do certain things a certain way, that eventually sometime, typically after we die and go to heaven, or wherever that religion's idea of a heaven might be, then we will have the experience of God. But what tends to happen what tends to happen, or at least if we look at some of the teachings, what we will experience is the idea was built into the organizational structure that somehow they were going to do it for us. Somehow they were going to do the things that needed to be done in order for us to achieve our experience of God. That all we had to do is follow the instructions that we were given, show up on whatever day of, the services were held, put our money in the plate, and live our lives or adjust our behavior according to the dogma and the creed, then everything would be okay. Now, there's that is the level one. That is the fundamental kind of level one consciousness that I talk about. When we started to get into level two, it got to be more into, well, that's okay. Certainly we want to behave as moral people. Certainly we want to do all of those good things, but that's not enough, you see. Because if my consciousness is going to experience the presence of God, then somehow I have to participate. Somebody else can't do it for me. They can't go to the gym and work out for me, and they can't do my spiritual growth for me. And by spiritual growth, we have to look at the definition again that we're using. Spiritual growth means that we are growing in the conscious awareness, the actual conscious realization of the presence and the activity of God in our lives. We are having or moving towards or preparing ourselves for that experience of the presence of God. As the early Christian religion was evolving, there became this struggle, and it was a struggle, and at times I believe it erupted into violence, between those who said, we have all the authority, we are in charge, we are going to tell you what it is that you ought to do, and those who said, well, that's wonderful, but that's not good enough for us. We have to have this knowing, this gnosis, G-N-O-S-I-S, this inner knowing. We have to have this experience for ourselves. We have to test your words to see if your words are true for us. We have to test the things that you are telling us. As Gospel of John said, try the gods to see if they're real or not. And there was a struggle that erupted between the Orthodox and the Gnostics. And of course the Orthodox won, and the Gnostics have been given negative press as a result of that. But there was actually a point where I believe it was Origen, who was a bishop in the early church, and he wrote a series of I can't remember what they call them, official documents, like an essay, but from a church leader, and he was just adamant, that this idea of gnosis was heresy. And he told the people that they needed to do what the church leaders told them to do. And if when they died and they got before God in the final judgment, if God said, why did you do something? You tell God it's because I told you to do it. And if it was wrong, then I will suffer the consequences, not you. That's what he was telling people. And interestingly enough, later in his life, he started to lean more towards the Gnostics himself. Because this is a progression that our consciousness matures through. When we are born, all of the power is out there somewhere. Our parents have to feed us and change us and clothe us and give us money to go to school and all those things. But there comes a time in our life when we have to realize that there's some things that only we can do for ourselves, and we must do them, and we can't let anybody else tell us that they're going to do it for us, because they can't. They'll tell us that. They'll ask us for money for doing it for them, for you, but they can't do for us that which we have been created to do for ourselves. So our spiritual growth then simply comes down to knowing ourselves. knowing ourselves, right? The oracle at the Temple of Delphi, the letters over the entrance to the Temple of Apollo said, know thyself. Know thyself. Now who can know us, you see? Who can know us other than we knowing ourselves? You can tell me what you think of me. You can tell me who you think I am. I can tell you what I think of you and who I think you are. But that that is not who I am, and that's not who you are. See, I have a mental idea. I have a mental construct of who you are, but that's not who you are. That's only my mental construct. We're told in the beginning, in the book of Genesis, we're told that God gave Adam and Eve dominion, and they could name all of the things of the earth. And the earth, in metaphysical interpretation, the earth is the situation in our lives, right? It's a demonstration of our lives. Naming things is assigning a mental concept to them. I mean, we call the animals by their names because that's what we learned while we were growing up. But if the names had been reversed, if a dog had been called a cat and a cat had been called a dog, we would grow up fat, dumb, and happy using the other terms. It's only a mental construct, you see. So what has happened, what we have, the issue that we have then in our spiritual growth is that when we're first developing, we are given all of these ideas by other people, and we kind of accept them as being, that's the way it is, you see. That, and in many cases we're told that's the only way that it is, and that's the only right way that it is, and somebody who doesn't agree with us is just simply wrong and don't pay any attention to them. And at some point we start to reach a point in our own growth where that's not good enough for us anymore. I'm not saying that the rules of behavior and commandments and all those things are tossed out the window. But I'm saying we don't behave in a moral fashion simply because somebody told us to. I had a friend who was in a religious organization for over 20 years and finally left. Excuse me. And she said that what she realized was that what she was doing was amoral. Not immoral, but amoral. She was doing it because somebody had told her it was the right thing to do, instead of feeling that it was the right thing to do, instead of knowing that it was the right thing to do. So our journey, excuse me, our journey as we grow is to move beyond ideas of separation and to truly come to know ourselves, to know ourselves. Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And his reasoning was, what is this thing that thinks? What is this thing that is conscious? What is this thing that is aware? Whatever that is, that's what we are. And we can't say that it is not, because if it says it is not, it is the one saying that it is not, and therefore it is. Sounds like doublespeak, but if I'm saying I'm not here, well, who said I'm not here? That kind of thing. But I think in our culture we have not just our culture. I think it's in human consciousness. The problem is that we haven't yet learned how to separate the self, know thyself, the self, what we are, from the thoughts. So we believe that we are the thoughts that we are thinking, and we are not. We are not. So our journey of spiritual growth then is to move beyond the thoughts to the thinker. I am not the thought. I'm not even the thinker of the thought, perhaps, but I am the observer of the thought. I am the one who has become aware. of the thought. In this fashion, what we are doing is we are moving beyond the ideas of separation. The ideas of separation, as we talked last week, the difference, the intellect can tell us that there's a place where the intellect can't go. And we have to move beyond the ideas of separation. They come from the intellect. If you think of what the intellect does, is it analyzes, it weighs, it measures, it divides, it categorizes, it classifies, and it sees something and it tries immediately to identify it. Do I know what that is? Oh, okay. Well, that's a fountain pen. Okay, I know what that is. Leave it alone. Leave it alone. By saying it's a fountain pen, we're saying it's not a pencil, it's not a hammer, it's not a nail, it's a fountain pen. And the intellect's job seems to be to identify things and separate them and divide them. And what we in knowing ourself, with a capital S, what we are doing is we are moving beyond ideas of separation. I love the quote by Rumi. Beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there is a field. I will meet you there. Ideas of right doing and wrong doing. He didn't even call them right doing and wrong doing. He called them ideas of right doing and wrong doing. We've been given dominion. We name things. We name things right doing. We name things wrong doing. And instead, we should be moving beyond to know that which is observing the ideas. So what is the most important thing in our entire lives? And I would say that the most important thing in our entire lives is this spiritual growth. Now the Buddhists have a wonderful example of impermanence, contemplating impermanence to help us put things in perspective. Everything is impermanent. Our bodies are impermanent. I was over the other day meeting with someone, and they were meeting in the CrossFit gym, and this is where the people train. If you watch the Ninja Warrior show on TV, this is where those people train. And these are amateur athletes. These are people with regular day jobs, and they get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and go to this gym and doing incredible things with their body. They do, climbing up ropes, climbing down ropes, and jumping from one ring to another ring, and all these kind of things. But even the best athlete, even the person who eats the perfect diet, even the person who exercises regularly, even those bodies will someday die. The life won't die because the life is immortal. But the body is impermanent. The businesses we go to work at are impermanent. The countries that we live in are impermanent. You remember the days when they actually had paper encyclopedias? Those of you who are old enough remember the World Book salesman would come to the house, or you'd go to the A&P and you get the one volume of the encyclopedia every week. Or go to the library. If you didn't have one, you had to go to the library and use the encyclopedia there. Every year they would publish a supplement to the encyclopedia. And the majority of the content in that supplement was new maps. New maps. As the political boundaries changed, as countries changed, even the countries we live in are impermanent. So how much time are we spending on that which is impermanent? And how much time are we spending on that which is truly permanent? If we were to look at our lives and say, my number one priority is my spiritual growth. If we come to the realization that no one else can do it for us, that since our consciousness is uniquely ours, and our spiritual growth is a change in our consciousness, a maturation in our consciousness, I have to be dedicated to it. Now, other people can help me. We can have members of the clergy who inspire us, who teach us, who give us tools, who point us in the right direction, all of those things. But that's it's much like watching a video on how to do a physical workout. Unless you get down on the floor and start doing push-ups, watching the video is not going to help you. Unless you become dedicated to doing that which only you can do, to have dominion over your thoughts, to know yourself, to move back past ideas of right doing and wrong doing to that field of beingness, to the I amness, to the isness, to the suchness that world religions, the people who have had the experience will tell us it's there, but we have to prepare ourselves for it. We have to do that which we can do. So I think if we look at the amount of time that we have awake in a day, and if we look at the amount of time that we spend in that day doing the one thing that we can do that no one can do for us, to be aware of thoughts, to be aware of thinking, to be aware of the presence within, to be aware of the unity, no one else can do that for us. But the question then becomes, how much of our waking hours, how much time do we really dedicate to that? Is it as much as we want it to be? If it's not, that's okay. For most of us, it's not. The Dalai Lama, somebody asked him what he would do when he retired, and he said he would spend more time in his spiritual practice. And the next question was, well, how much time do you spend now? And he said, oh, about 6 hours a day. So even though he spent 6 hours a day, he wanted to spend more. If we're spending 20 minutes a day, we want to spend more. If we're spending 5 minutes a day, we want to spend more. But we want to recognize when we get up in the morning that our number one priority for that day is to do the most important thing that only we can do. And that is to continue to grow in our awareness of the unity, of the love, of the peace, and of the presence of God. Joel Goldsmith is a modern mystic, and you've heard me talk about the 3 levels of consciousness, and Goldsmith squarely falls into the third. You know, he says levels 1 and 2 are okay, but level 3 is where it's at. Now, sometimes when I read him, I think that he's forgotten that level 1 and 2 are necessary. We can't pretend to be in level 3 without having completed what we needed to do in levels 1 and level 2. But Goldsmith started a teaching called The Infinite Way. And he said one day somebody came to him and said, Joel, why don't you start a university, like a college, and you can bring students in, and it will be the Infinite Way College, and you can teach people the teachings of the Infinite Way. And Goldsmith laughed, and he said, if you can find me a bunch of students who are willing to give me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to spend several hours a day in meditation for at least 7 years of their lives, then we might be able to do something. He says, but it doesn't happen that way. The individual has to awaken on their own. He said, if you want to know, if the student wants to know how quickly progress will be made on your spiritual path, the answer lies in how much time do they dedicate to their spiritual practice. And he said, it's that simple. Spend a few minutes here, a few minutes there, a few minutes someplace else. You can have a glimpse. You can have an experience. Nobody's saying you won't. But when we set our intention that our spiritual growth is the most important thing in our lives, and we are willing to dedicate our time to it, and spend time in our practice, and find the practice that is right for us, then our growth is in earnest. So I go back to the gym that I was at. These people work regular jobs, but they're there at 5:30 in the morning, putting their body through a series of activities that you and I could look at and go, oh my goodness, how did they do that? We watch the Olympics and invariably, they give the medal to somebody, and then they go to the parents and they say, now here's the parent who got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and got this child ready to drive them to the gym or the ice rink, or depending on their particular sport. And they put in their hours of training before they went to school, and then they put in hours of training after they came back home from school, and they still did their homework. We can look at the physical activity and we can say, yes, these people are dedicated to that and they get their results. And I think what we want to do is we want to flip that over to the spiritual activity. Because that which is physical will one day be gone. That which we are putting the majority of our time and attention to in this life will one day be gone. But the thing that will remain will be our consciousness. The thing that the only one who can do something with our consciousness is ourselves. And I invite you to consider this week, how much time are you spending with the most important thing in your life? Developing your consciousness, performing your spiritual practice, taking dominion over your thoughts. I'll just close with this. So much of the discourse that we see in the public forum today centers around people who say, I didn't have a choice. I didn't have a choice. Someone called me a name and I didn't have a choice but to be insulted, and they owe me an apology. Someone said this and I didn't have a choice but to get angry. Someone said that and I didn't have a choice but to take action. And in most of those cases, people are trying to delegate the responsibility to someone else for that which only they are responsible for. We always have a choice. We always have a choice. The Dalai Lama tells a story of a Buddhist monk who had been in prison for over 20 years when Tibet was invaded. And after the monk got out of prison, he said to the monk, were you ever afraid? And the monk says, yes, I was afraid that I might come to hate those who were torturing me. Viktor Frankl, in Man's Search for Meaning, said if he made up his mind in Auschwitz to be happy, we always have a choice. But in order to exercise that choice, we must take dominion. We must do that which only we can do. No one else will do it for you. Let this be the week. Let this be the day. Whatever time you're spending in your spiritual practice, increase it. Take it up a notch. And so it is.